Deep beneath the surface of a forgotten world, where darkness has reigned for 60 million years, something stirs. Ancient machinery groans to life, systems that predate human civilization by epochs uncounted. The Necrons are awakening, but in the lightless depths of their tomb, buried among corridors that have not seen movement since before the rise of the Eldari Empire, their sensors detect something that should not exist. Something that defies the cold logic of their reanimation protocols. Something alive, or at least, something close enough to life that it registers on systems designed to catalogue every atom of their domain. This is the story of an impossible meeting, a collision between two of the galaxy's most secretive forces, both masters of deception in their own right, both operating according to philosophies that value misdirection and hidden purpose above all else. When the immortal machines of the Necron dynasties discover a slumbering space marine dreadnought in the depths of their tomb world, bearing the colors and iconography of the Alpha Legion, what unfolds is not a simple tale of battle. It is a mystery wrapped in layers of strategy, a confrontation between beings who have both transcended death in their own ways, and a scenario that raises questions about loyalty, purpose, and the nature of consciousness itself. The very premise seems impossible at first consideration. How could a space marine dreadnought, a walking war machine containing the mortally wounded body of an Adeptus Astartes warrior, end up buried deep within a Necron tomb world? The Alpha Legion, the most secretive of the traitor legions, operating with methods so convoluted that even their own battle brothers sometimes question their true allegiances, finding one of their ancient warriors interred alongside Xenos technology that predates humanity itself. It is a scenario that speaks to the vast scope of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, where millions of worlds hold secrets that may never be uncovered, where civilizations rise and fall in the space between the blinks of immortal eyes, and where the impossible becomes merely improbable when viewed across the span of 10,000 years of warfare. To understand how such a thing could occur, we must first understand the players in this strange drama. We must delve into the nature of the Necrons themselves, those undying legions of living metal who slumber in tombs scattered across the galaxy, waiting for the day when they will reclaim their ancient dominion. We must explore the Alpha Legion, the 20th and final Space Marine Legion, whose methods were considered controversial even before they turned against the Emperor during the Horus Heresy. And we must examine the Dreadnoughts themselves, those towering war machines that serve as both weapon and prison, tomb and temple, granting their occupants a form of immortality that many would consider worse than death. The Necrons sleep in stasis, their consciousness preserved across millions of years, waiting for the protocols established by the Silent King to awaken them when the galaxy is ripe for conquest once more. The Dreadnought pilot also sleeps, locked in dreamless stasis between deployments, his broken body sustained by ancient technology, his mind slowly eroding across centuries of intermittent consciousness. Both are prisoners of their own immortality, bound to duty that extends beyond the natural limits of life, serving purposes that were determined for them by others. When these two forms of artificial eternity collide, when the Necrons' awakening senses detect the presence of this sleeping warrior in their midst, the implications ripple outward in ways that neither side can fully predict. This is not a simple story of Xenos versus humanity, of ancient evil versus the defenders of mankind. The Alpha Legion's loyalties have always been questionable at best, their actions guided by agendas that remain obscure even after 10 millennia of observation. The Necrons, for their part, are not mindless killing machines, despite what Imperial propaganda might suggest. They are individuals with personalities, ambitions, and the accumulated wisdom of civilizations that existed when Terra was still a primordial jungle. When such beings encounter one another, when they must navigate the treacherous waters of first contact, while neither side fully understands the other's capabilities or intentions, What results is a complex dance of strategy, misdirection, and calculated risk. The tomb world itself becomes a character in this drama, its ancient systems responding to stimuli in ways that may not align with either the Necrons' intentions or the Dreadnought's survival protocols. Automated defenses that have not activated in millions of years suddenly detecting foreign technology. Canoptech constructs, those tireless machine servants that maintain the tomb in its master's absence, encountering something their programming was never designed to process. The very architecture of the tomb, designed by Necron engineers before they underwent biotransference, incorporating principles of warfare and defense that humans have never encountered, becomes both arena and obstacle for the confrontation that unfolds. The Necrons, ancient masters of the galaxy. To comprehend the full weight of this scenario, we must first turn our attention to the Necrons themselves, those deathless legions whose origins stretch back to a time so ancient that the oldest human civilizations would be considered mere infants by comparison. The Necrons are not simply another alien race vying for dominance in the galaxy. They are the remnants of the Necrontyr, a people whose civilizations spanned the stars when humanity's ancestors were still single-celled organisms floating in primordial oceans. They are beings who waged war against gods and won, who reshaped the very fabric of reality in their desperate quest for immortality, and who now awaken from 60 million years of slumber to find a galaxy utterly transformed. The story of the Necrons begins in an age of legend, in times so remote that even their own memories have become fragmented and unreliable. The Necrontyr were a mortal species, plagued by short lifespans and ravaged by the harsh radiation of their home star. Their civilization was built around death, with monuments to the deceased far outstripping anything constructed for the living. They were a species defined by their mortality, by the knowledge that their lives would be brief and painful, cut short by cancers and genetic degradation caused by their sun's malevolent energies. In their desperation to escape this curse, they expanded outward to the stars, colonizing worlds across the galaxy in vast generation ships, hoping to find relief from the radiation that poisoned their flesh. But death followed them wherever they went. The fundamental flaw was woven into their very genetic code, a ticking clock that no amount of technological advancement could stop. It was this desperation, this civilization-wide obsession with mortality, that would ultimately lead them to make the most catastrophic decision in galactic history. When they encountered the Satan, those vast energy beings that fed upon the light of stars, the Necrontyr saw an opportunity. Here were creatures that existed beyond the cycle of life and death, entities that had persisted since the universe's formation. If they could harness that power, if they could somehow transcend their flesh entirely, they might finally escape the curse that had defined their species since its inception. The biotransference, as this process came to be known, was presented by their leaders as salvation. The Silent King Zarek, ruler of the entire Necrontyr civilization, negotiated with the Satan known as the Deceiver, and an agreement was reached. Every Necrontyr would be transferred from their failing organic forms into bodies of living metal, bodies that would not age, would not sicken, would not die. They would become immortal, freed at last from the curse that had haunted their species for so long. The entire population of their civilization willingly entered the biofurnaces, their consciousness digitized and transferred into mechanical bodies constructed of the mysterious substance known as necrodermis. But it was a trick, a betrayal of incomprehensible magnitude. When the Necrontyr awakened in their new bodies, they discovered that something fundamental had been taken from them. Their souls, those ineffable essences that made them individuals, had been consumed by the Catan during the transfer process. What emerged from the biotransference were not the immortal gods they had hoped to become, but soulless automatons, their personalities diminished or erased entirely, depending on their rank in Necrontyr society. The common warriors retained almost nothing of their former selves, reduced to little more than programmable soldiers. The nobles and leaders maintained more of their consciousness, but even they found themselves hollowed out, capable of thought and strategy, but no longer able to feel in the ways they once had. The war in heaven that followed was a conflict of such scale that it reshaped the galaxy itself. The Necrons, now enslaved to the Citan, waged war against the Old Ones, those ancient beings who had refused to share their secrets of immortality with the desperate Necrontyr. It was a war fought with weapons that could extinguish stars, with technologies that tore holes in reality itself. The Necrons proved unstoppable in conventional warfare, their immortal bodies able to phase in and out of existence, their Gauss weaponry capable of stripping matter away atom by atom. But the Old Ones had their own advantages, creating new species to fight as their soldiers, including the ancestors of the Aeldari and the Orcs, and wielding the powers of the warp with a mastery that would never again be equaled. The war raged for millions of years, consuming entire sectors of the galaxy. Worlds were rendered lifeless. Civilizations that had nothing to do with the conflict were caught in the crossfire and annihilated. The very fabric of reality began to fray under the strain of the weapons being deployed. In desperation, the Old Ones opened the warp to use its energies more directly in the conflict, but this proved to be a catastrophic mistake. The psychic anguish of quadrillions of dying beings began to coalesce in the Imperium, giving birth to the first entities that would eventually become the Chaos Gods. The enslavers, nightmarish creatures from the warp, poured through the breaches and began to possess every psychically sensitive being they could find, turning the Old Ones' greatest weapons against them. It was in the aftermath of the war in heaven, with the Old Ones defeated but the galaxy in ruins and the enslavers running rampant, that the Silent King made his final gambit. The Necrons had overthrown their Citan masters, shattering the star gods into countless fragments and imprisoning them in tesseract labyrinths. But the war had taken its toll on the Necrons as well. Millions had been destroyed, their tomb complexes damaged or compromised. The Silent King recognized that in their weakened state, they could not hold the galaxy against the enslavers and the newly emergent Aeldari civilization. So he commanded a great sleep, ordering all Necrons to enter stasis in specially prepared tomb worlds scattered across the galaxy, to slumber until a time when the galaxy would be ready for their return. The tomb worlds themselves are marvels of Necrontyr engineering, vast underground complexes that can span entire continents. They are categorized into 3 types based on their importance to the Necron dynasties. The Crown Worlds are the most significant ancient seats of power that served as capitals during the height of the Necrontyr civilization. These worlds were chosen for their strategic importance and their defensive capabilities, and they contain the best preserved Necrons, including many of the most powerful overlords and pharaons. The core worlds form the backbone of each dynasty's territory, secondary centers of power that house significant military forces and important repositories of technology. Finally, the fringe worlds mark the outer boundaries of Necron space, less well defended and often suffering from cascade failures of their stasis systems, but still fiercely protected by their inhabitants. Each tomb world is protected by layers of defenses, both active and passive. The most obvious are the Necron warriors themselves, rank-and-file soldiers who can phase into battle with Gauss weapons ready. But the true guardians of the tombs are the Canoptech constructs, autonomous machines that require no direction from the sleeping Necrons to perform their duties. Canoptech scarabs swarm in their billions, capable of disassembling any threat at the molecular level or repairing damage to the tomb's systems. Canoptech wraiths phase through walls and solid matter, hunting intruders with a relentlessness that cannot be dissuaded. Canoptech spiders, larger constructs that serve as mobile repair stations, coordinate the activities of the smaller machines and can fabricate new defenders as needed. But perhaps the most insidious defense is the tomb world's ability to remain hidden. Many Necron tomb worlds are buried deep beneath the surfaces of planets that have been colonized by other species in the millions of years since the Great Sleep began. The Imperium of man has unknowingly built cities, hives, and even fortress monasteries atop slumbering Necrons, completely unaware of the ancient evil that rests beneath their foundations. Some tomb worlds are hidden in pocket dimensions, accessible only through dimensional gates that appear to be nothing more than strange geological formations. Others are cloaked by stasis fields that render them undetectable to all but the most sophisticated scanning equipment, and even then, only if you know exactly what you're looking for. The awakening process for a tomb world is gradual and systematic, overseen by ancient protocols programmed into the tomb systems millions of years ago. Power must be carefully allocated between three primary systems: command, which governs the hierarchy and allows the nobles to coordinate their forces; reanimation, which brings the sleeping Necrons back to consciousness and maintains the self-repair functions of their necrodermis bodies; and translocation, which powers the phase technology that allows Necrons to teleport across the battlefield. Each system must be activated in sequence, with power carefully rationed to avoid cascading failures that could doom the entire tomb. When a tomb world awakens, it does not immediately field its full strength. The process can take decades, or even centuries, with small numbers of Necrons activating, first to assess the situation and begin repairs to damaged systems. Cryptechs, the technological masters of Necron society, are among the first to awaken, using their deep understanding of the ancient sciences to restore power to critical systems and evaluate the extent of any damage the tomb has suffered during its long sleep. Lords and overlords awaken next, their consciousness returning to find a galaxy utterly transformed from the one they remember. Some adapt quickly, their programming allowing them to rapidly assess the new threats and opportunities. Others struggle with the changes, their minds damaged by the long sleep or by the biotransference itself, unable to reconcile the world they find with their memories of the past. Not all tomb worlds awaken successfully. Some have been destroyed entirely, victims of tectonic activity that crushed their stasis vaults, or stellar phenomena that reduced their worlds to lifeless cinders. Others have suffered cascade failures of their systems, with the loss of power to critical components, resulting in the permanent destruction of millions of dormant Necrons. Some have been plundered by other races, their most valuable technologies stolen by Aeldari corsairs or acquired by the Adeptus Mechanicus through archaeological expeditions. The greatest tragedy for any Necron dynasty is to awaken and find that their tomb has been compromised, their numbers devastated, their weapons and equipment scattered across the galaxy. But for those tomb worlds that awaken intact, for those dynasties whose luck or planning has allowed them to survive the 60 million years of sleep, the prospects are terrifying for the galaxy's younger races. The Necrons possess technology that makes Imperial weapons look like primitive clubs by comparison. Their Gauss weaponry strips away matter at the subatomic level, flaying victims alive, layer by layer, until nothing remains. Their quantum shielding can redirect incoming fire into alternate dimensions, rendering conventional weapons useless. Their living metal bodies can self-repair even catastrophic damage, with warriors torn apart by explosions, reassembling themselves moments later. And their command of dimensional physics allows them to appear and disappear at will, to phase through solid matter, to manipulate time itself in localized areas. The Necron nobility, those who retained the most of their consciousness through biotransference, are not mere warriors. They are strategists who have witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, who have studied warfare for millions of years, who possess a depth of experience that no mortal mind could encompass. A Necron overlord might have personally led campaigns during the war in heaven, fought against the Old Ones when terror was still a molten ball of rock. Their tactics incorporate lessons learned from conflicts that took place before the Aeldari Empire even existed. They are patient beyond human comprehension, willing to wait centuries for the perfect moment to strike, confident that time itself is their ally. The Alpha Legion, masters of deception. If the Necrons represent the weight of deep time, the accumulated knowledge of millions of years compressed into living metal, then the Alpha Legion represents something different, but equally unsettling: the deliberate subversion of certainty itself. They are the 20th Space Marine Legion, the last to be discovered during the Great Crusade, and they have always existed at the edges of understanding, operating according to principles that even their brother legions found disturbing. Where other legions crushed enemies through superior firepower or unstoppable assaults, the Alpha Legion won their victories before the enemy even realized they were at war. They are the Hydra, the many-headed serpent whose symbol adorns their armor, and their fundamental philosophy is one of redundancy, misdirection, and operational security so thorough that, sometimes even, they don't know the full extent of their own plans. The origins of the Alpha Legion are shrouded in mystery and contradictory reports, which is entirely fitting for a force that has made secrecy its defining characteristic. Unlike most Space Marine legions, which were created openly and deployed with great fanfare during the early days of the Great Crusade, the Alpha Legion appears to have existed in some form long before it was officially recognized. Imperial records contain references to unmarked Space Marines conducting special operations during the Unification Wars on Terra, warriors who bore no Legion insignia but who operated with an authority that superseded even that of the Primarchs. These mysterious forces, designated simply as Alpha in what few records exist, carried out assassinations, abductions, and acts of sabotage against the Emperor's enemies, striking from the shadows and vanishing before anyone could determine their origin. Some scholars believe the Alpha Legion was deliberately kept secret by the Emperor himself, held in reserve for special purposes that required absolute deniability. The gene seed used to create the Legion's Space Marines was classified at the highest levels, with even the Adeptus Mechanicus forbidden from examining it in detail. The Legion remained small by design, never expanding beyond a few thousand warriors in its early years, despite requests from their commanders to increase recruitment. This has led to speculation that there was something unusual about the Alpha Legion's gene seed, some modification or flaw that required the Emperor's personal oversight to manage. Others suggest that the Legion was always meant to operate as a small, elite force, that increasing their numbers would have diluted the very qualities that made them valuable. When Alfarius, the Primarch of the Alpha Legion, was finally discovered, he already commanded a fleet of rebel humans at the edge of the galaxy, apparently having independently built a power base without the Emperor's guidance. But even this discovery is wrapped in conflicting accounts. Some sources claim that Alfarius was actually one of two identical twin Primarchs, Alfarius and Omegon, both scattered by chaos, but somehow remaining in contact with one another across the vastness of space. This would explain many of the seemingly impossible feats attributed to Alfarius, his ability to be in multiple places at once, the contradictory reports of his death. If there were two Primarchs, each capable of coordinating with the other, it would give the Alpha Legion a strategic flexibility that no other legion could match. The tactical philosophy of the Alpha Legion is built around several core principles. The first is redundancy. Every operation should have multiple fallback plans, multiple teams capable of completing the objective, multiple layers of deception to confuse the enemy about what is actually happening. If one cell of Alpha Legion operatives is captured or killed, 3 others continue the operation with their own objectives, ensuring that the overall plan proceeds regardless of individual losses. This principle extends to their command structure as well. Alpha Legion Space Marines are trained to think and act independently, capable of assuming command if their superiors are eliminated. The famous phrase, "I am Alfarius," is not merely a boast, but a statement of operational philosophy. Any Alpha Legion warrior can take on the role of their Primarch if needed, continuing the fight with the same ruthless efficiency. The second principle is misdirection. The Alpha Legion rarely attacks targets directly if there is any other option available. Instead, they infiltrate enemy organizations, turning them against one another, creating chaos and confusion that serves their purposes better than any direct assault could. They plant false information, allowing enemies to discover plans that lead them into traps. They conduct false flag operations, attacking targets while wearing the colors of rival factions, turning potential allies into enemies. They excel at the long game, at operations that might take years or decades to come to fruition, at weaving webs of manipulation so complex that even when their involvement is discovered, no one can determine their true objectives. The third principle is information control. The Alpha Legion operates on the assumption that knowledge itself is a weapon, that controlling what the enemy knows or believes can be more valuable than controlling territory or resources. They hack communication networks, not just to gather intelligence, but to feed false information. They allow some of their operatives to be captured, so that under interrogation, they can reveal carefully crafted lies mixed with enough truth to be believable. They create elaborate cover identities that stand up to the most intensive scrutiny, infiltrating enemy organizations at the highest levels. Some Alpha Legion operatives have spent entire lifetimes maintaining their cover, living and dying in the service of plans that they themselves do not fully understand. This approach to warfare created significant friction with other Space Marine legions. Reboot Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, was particularly critical of the Alpha Legion's methods. During the compliance of Testra Prime, the Alpha Legion conducted a masterpiece of covert warfare, using infiltration, assassination, and psychological operations to destabilize the planet's government before a single shot was officially fired. By the time the campaign was declared complete, the enemy had suffered 90% casualties, and their defensive infrastructure was in ruins. Yet the Alpha Legion had barely engaged in direct combat. Guilliman declared the operation a waste of time and resources, arguing that a straightforward assault would have achieved the same result in a fraction of the time. This philosophical difference would never be reconciled, creating animosity between the legions that would persist even after the Horus Heresy. When the Horus Heresy erupted, tearing the Imperium apart and pitting Space Marine against Space Marine in a civil war that would determine the fate of humanity, the Alpha Legion's actions were characteristically enigmatic. They sided with Horus, declaring for the War Master and participating in attacks against loyalist forces. The Alpha Legion attacked the Raven Guard on Istvan Fav, contributing to the massacre that nearly destroyed 3 loyal legions. They conducted operations throughout the galaxy, sabotaging Imperial infrastructure, assassinating key commanders, spreading confusion and discord wherever they appeared. But there were always questions, always anomalies in their behavior that didn't quite add up. Some claim to have received aid from Alpha Legion forces during the darkest days of the heresy, encountering warriors in the Hydra-scaled armor who fought alongside them against chaos before disappearing without explanation. Others reported Alpha Legion strikes against Chaos-aligned forces, operations that seemed to serve no purpose if the Legion was truly committed to Horus's cause. The most disturbing theory, whispered among those few who know the full extent of the Alpha Legion's complexity, is that the Legion might still be loyal to the Emperor, that their apparent betrayal was itself a deception, part of a plan so intricate that it required them to turn against everything they had once served. This theory centers on an encounter between Alfarius and representatives of an ancient cabal of Xenos, beings who claimed to have seen the future and warned that if the Emperor won the heresy, chaos would eventually corrupt humanity entirely, leading to the galaxy's doom. But if Horus won and the Imperium fell, they claimed, humanity would be destroyed quickly, and chaos would starve without its primary food source. The Cabal supposedly convinced Alfarius that the only way to save the galaxy was to ensure Horus's victory even if it meant the extinction of the human race. Whether this story is true, whether the Alpha Legion actually believed such a dubious prophecy, or whether it was itself a layer of deception designed to hide their true motives, remains unknown even 10 millennia later. In the 41st millennium, the Alpha Legion continues to operate according to patterns established during the Great Crusade, but their objectives remain obscure. They maintain cell-based structures, with small teams of operatives scattered across the galaxy, each pursuing their own missions with minimal coordination from any central authority. Some Alpha Legion warbands openly serve chaos, their armor decorated with profane symbols, their actions clearly aligned with the ruinous powers. Others seem to fight against chaos with the same fervor they once showed fighting for the Emperor. Still others pursue objectives that have nothing to do with either side, engaging in elaborate schemes whose purposes cannot be discerned from external observation. The Alpha Legion's approach to recruitment is similarly unconventional. Unlike most Space Marine chapters, which maintain relatively strict control over their gene seed and recruit from specific worlds, the Alpha Legion's gene seed has spread across the galaxy through means that would horrify the Inquisition if they knew the full extent. Some Alpha Legion cells maintain their own recruitment programs, identifying suitable candidates and implanting them with gene seed acquired through unknown channels. Others use more sinister methods, capturing loyalist Space Marines and through a combination of mental conditioning and genetic manipulation, converting them to the Alpha Legion's cause. There are persistent rumors of entire Space Marine chapters being secretly controlled by the Alpha Legion, thinking themselves loyal servants of the Emperor, while unknowingly furthering Alpha Legion objectives. The tactics employed by modern Alpha Legion forces remain true to the principles established by their Primarch. They favor infiltration over direct assault, using cultist uprisings, false flag operations, and elaborate deceptions to weaken their enemies before revealing their true strength. When they do engage in direct combat, they strike with surgical precision, eliminating key targets before melting back into the shadows. Their forces typically include large numbers of human operatives, cultists who serve the Legion either out of genuine belief in their cause or through manipulation and coercion. These mortal agents serve as cannon fodder and cover for the Space Marines, making it difficult for enemies to distinguish between a genuine Alpha Legion operation and the actions of independent heretics. The Alpha Legion's relationship with chaos is as ambiguous as everything else about them. Some of their warriors bear obvious signs of chaos, corruption, having accepted the gifts of the dark gods in exchange for enhanced powers. Others appear relatively uncorrupted, maintaining their equipment and discipline in ways that suggest they have not fully embraced the warp's influence. This has led to speculation that some Alpha Legion cells deliberately cultivate the appearance of chaos worship as another layer of deception, allowing the Imperium to dismiss them as simple heretics, rather than recognizing the more sophisticated threat they represent. Dreadnoughts, warriors beyond death. To understand what the Necrons would discover in their tomb, we must examine the nature of the Dreadnought itself, those towering war machines that represent both the pinnacle of the Imperium's life-extending technology and a fate that many consider worse than death. A Dreadnought is not simply a vehicle or a suit of armor. It is a tomb, a life support system, and a weapon system all combined into one, housing the mortally wounded body of a space Marine hero who has been deemed too valuable to lose. The pilot is not so much operating the Dreadnought as they are the Dreadnought, their consciousness merged with the machine through a web of neural links that blur the line between flesh and steel. The process of becoming a Dreadnought begins with catastrophic injury. Not every wounded Space Marine is selected for this honor, if honor is even the right word. The selection criteria are strict. The warrior must have distinguished themselves in service to their chapter, proven their worth through countless battles, demonstrated the kind of tactical acumen and leadership that would be invaluable to future generations. But they must also be wounded beyond the ability of even Space Marine medicine to fully repair. Lost limbs can be replaced with bionics. Damaged organs can be regenerated or substituted. Even severe brain trauma can sometimes be repaired through the intervention of skilled apothecaries. But when a warrior's body is so completely destroyed that only fragments remain, when conventional medical intervention would result in a barely functional cripple at best, that is when the option of internment in a dreadnought is considered. The decision is never made lightly. Chapter masters consult with their most senior chaplains and tech marines before determining whether a fallen hero should be granted this extended existence. The wounded warrior himself may be consulted if he is conscious enough to understand the choice being offered, though in practice this is rare. More often, the decision must be made while the dying space marine lies in suspended animation, his Susan membrane having triggered automatically to preserve his life in the face of mortal trauma. The chapter's leadership must weigh the value of preserving this warrior's experience and tactical knowledge against the spiritual and practical costs of interment. The actual process of internment is lengthy and irreversible. The Space Marine's broken body is carefully extracted from his damaged armor, with apothecaries working to preserve what little remains intact. What is left after catastrophic injury is often shockingly small. A torso, perhaps portions of limbs, the head and brain preserved at all costs, since they contain the irreplaceable consciousness of the warrior. This remnant is placed into an amniotic sarcophagus, a coffin-like structure filled with preservative fluids that will sustain the failing organs for centuries or millennia to come. Neural plugs are implanted directly into the warrior's brain and spinal column, creating links that will allow him to interface with the Dreadnought systems. The sarcophagus is then installed into the Dreadnought chassis itself, typically housed in the torso of the war machine, where it can be protected by the thickest armor plating. The neural links are connected to the Dreadnought systems, establishing the pathways through which the pilot will perceive the world and control his new body. This connection is far more intimate than simply operating a vehicle. The pilot doesn't use controls to move the Dreadnought's limbs. He moves them as naturally as he once moved his own arms and legs. He doesn't look through cameras. The machine's sensors become his eyes. Its audio receptors become his ears. The Dreadnought's armor plating registers as his skin. Damage to the hull felt as pain signals transmitted directly to his brain. But this merger of flesh and machine comes at a terrible cost to the pilot's psyche. The extended neural interface, required to control something as large and complex as a dreadnought, places immense stress on the human mind. Even for a space marine, whose enhanced neurological systems are far more resilient than those of normal humans, the strain is almost unbearable. Pilots report feeling disconnected from their former selves, struggling to remember what it felt like to walk on two legs, to feel the wind on their skin, to eat and drink and sleep in the way that living beings do. The passage of time becomes distorted, with moments of battle feeling like they last for hours, while decades in stasis pass in what seems like seconds. This psychological burden is one reason why dreadnoughts are kept in stasis between deployments. The chapter's tech marines maintain special chambers called the Halls of Remembrance or the Vault of Ancients, depending on the chapter's traditions, where the dreadnoughts rest between wars. The sarcophagus is removed from the dreadnought chassis and placed in a stasis field, effectively freezing the pilot in time, preventing further deterioration of both his physical body and his sanity. In this state, the space marine within experiences no passage of time, no dreams, no sensation of any kind. One moment he is being returned to his vault after a battle, and the next moment, which might be decades or even centuries later, he is being awakened for deployment once more. The awakening process is both reverently ritual and brutally practical. Chaplains invoke prayers to the Emperor, while tech marines systematically bring the dreadnought systems online, carefully monitoring for any signs of malfunction or degradation. Power cells are charged, weapon systems calibrated, armor plating inspected for damage or wear. the pilot's consciousness is gradually brought back from the void of stasis, a process that must be handled carefully to avoid psychological shock. Some Dreadnought pilots awaken confused, struggling to remember where they are or what has happened. Others emerge from stasis with perfect clarity, immediately aware of their situation and ready for deployment. Much depends on how long the pilot has been interred, how many awakenings he has experienced, and how well his particular psyche is handling the strain of his existence. The oldest Dreadnoughts, those veterans who have been awakening and sleeping for thousands of years, often display signs of significant mental deterioration. Their memories of their time as flesh and blood space marines become fragmented and unreliable, faces and names fading into a haze of uncertainty. They struggle to form new memories, finding that each awakening blends together with all the others until they can no longer distinguish between battles fought a century ago and those fought yesterday. Some develop a cold, calculating demeanor, losing the ability to empathize with their battle brothers who still live and breathe in the normal way. Others become increasingly erratic, their damaged psyches manifesting as rage, paranoia, or disturbing obsessions. Despite these challenges, Dreadnoughts remain invaluable assets to their chapters. On the battlefield, they serve as heavy infantry support, capable of laying down devastating fire from their ranged weapons while advancing toward enemy positions with the inexorability of a walking fortress. A standard Castroferrum pattern Dreadnought, the most common type still in service, stands roughly 3 times the height of a man and mounts weapons that would typically require a vehicle to carry. One arm might bear an assault cannon, a rapid-fire rotary weapon capable of shredding infantry and light vehicles with streams of high-velocity rounds. The other might mount a power fist or Dreadnought close combat weapon, massive hydraulic claws that can crush battle tanks or tear through reinforced bunkers. But beyond their battlefield prowess, Dreadnoughts serve another crucial function. They are living links to their chapter's history. A Dreadnought pilot who has been awakened and returned to stasis hundreds of times across thousands of years will have witnessed events that have passed into legend for younger Space Marines. He may have fought alongside heroes whose names are now carved in the chapter's halls of remembrance, witnessed the founding of successor chapters, participated in campaigns that shaped the Imperium's history. When such an ancient awakens, his battle brothers treat him with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. For in a very real sense, he is a relic, a fragment of the past made manifest. This makes the psychological toll of internment even more tragic. These heroes, who gave everything in service to the Emperor, who suffered wounds so severe that death should have claimed them, are denied the rest they have earned. Instead, they are preserved in this half-life, awakened periodically to fight again, their existence an endless cycle of brief, violent consciousness separated by centuries of dreamless stasis. Many chapters maintain the fiction that internment in a Dreadnought is the highest honor, a reward for exceptional service, a way to continue serving the Emperor even after the body has failed. But the Dreadnoughts themselves, in their rare, candid moments, tell a different story. They speak of isolation, of watching everyone they knew fade into dust, of feeling more machine than man with each passing century. For the Chaos Space Marines, the situation is even more grim. Chaos Dreadnoughts, or Hellbrutes as they are often called, suffer from the added burden of the warp's corrupting influence. Many were interred in their Dreadnoughts before the Horus Heresy, making them over 10,000 years old, and the centuries have not been kind to their sanity. Chaos warbands often keep their Dreadnoughts shackled between battles, as the pilots have become so deranged that they cannot distinguish friend from foe. When finally unleashed on the battlefield, they rampage with mindless fury, attacking anything that moves, friend and foe alike, until either the enemy is destroyed or the Hellbrute itself is finally put out of its misery. The Alpha Legion's approach to Dreadnoughts is characteristically unconventional. Unlike other Space Marine legions and chapters, which revere their Dreadnoughts as honored ancients and deploy them openly as inspirational figures, The Alpha Legion has been known to use Dreadnoughts as part of elaborate deceptions. An Alpha Legion Dreadnought might be painted in the colors of a Loyalist chapter and deployed in a false flag operation, making it appear that the Loyalists are attacking civilian targets or allied forces. Or a Dreadnought might be used to spread disinformation, its pilot programmed or conditioned to believe false memories that will seem authentic under interrogation, should the machine be captured. There are also darker rumors about Alpha Legion Dreadnoughts, whispers that the Legion sometimes uses internment as a form of punishment rather than honor. Captured enemy Space Marines, or even Alpha Legion warriors who have failed critical missions, might be forcibly interred in Dreadnought sarcophagi and kept conscious, unable to move or sleep, locked in sensory deprivation for years or decades until their sanity completely shatters. The resulting broken minds can then be programmed to serve as suicide attackers or sleeper agents, carriers of false information who genuinely believe the lies they've been conditioned to tell. For an Alpha Legion Dreadnought to end up buried in a Necron tomb suggests multiple layers of disaster, betrayal, or elaborate planning. It implies a failed mission of incredible importance, or perhaps a mission that succeeded but required the Dreadnought to be abandoned as part of the plan. It raises questions about what the Alpha Legion was doing on a world that would later reveal itself to be a Necron tomb, what they knew about the ancient Xenos technology buried beneath the surface, and whether the Dreadnought's presence was intentional or accidental. These questions become even more urgent when the Necrons begin their awakening and their sensors detect this impossible intrusion into their sacred tomb. How this could happen? The setup. The scenario of an Alpha Legion Dreadnought buried within a Necron tomb requires an explanation that can account for both the physical logistics and the strategic circumstances that would lead to such an improbable situation. This is not a simple case of a space marine wandering into the wrong cave. Necron tomb worlds are buried deep beneath planetary surfaces, protected by multiple layers of defense and concealment. For a Dreadnought to end up interred alongside the sleeping Necrons requires either catastrophic failure of an Alpha Legion operation or a plan so intricate that its true purpose may never be fully understood. Perhaps, given the Alpha Legion's nature, it requires both. One possible scenario begins during the closing years of the Great Crusade, before the Horus heresy sundered the Imperium. The Alpha Legion was tasked with investigating reports of strange technology discovered on a distant world in the process of being brought into compliance. Imperial survey teams had found unusual readings beneath the planet's surface, geometric patterns that suggested artificial construction, energy signatures that didn't match any known technology. The Mechanicus wanted to investigate, but the world was home to a human civilization that had regressed to a pre-industrial state during Old Night, and any obvious military intervention might make future integration more difficult. This was exactly the kind of operation the Alpha Legion excelled at. A small team of operatives, supported by local auxiliaries who had been carefully recruited and indoctrinated, could infiltrate the planet's power structures and gain access to the anomalous sites without alerting the native population. If the technology proved valuable, it could be secured for the Imperium. If it proved dangerous, it could be neutralized. The Alpha Legion cell assigned to the operation included a venerable Dreadnought, one of the Legion's most experienced warriors, whose tactical database contained information about Xenos technology that might prove relevant to identifying what lay beneath the planet's surface. What they found was a Necron tomb world in the very early stages of awakening. The protocols that would eventually rouse the entire tomb were just beginning to activate, with power trickling through systems that had been dormant for 60 million years. The canoptech constructs that should have been maintaining the tomb had mostly deteriorated beyond function, leaving critical systems unrepaired and vulnerable. The Alpha Legion operatives immediately recognized the magnitude of their discovery. This was not simply ancient technology, This was evidence of a civilization that predated humanity by epochs, a civilization that might still pose a threat if it ever fully awakened. The decision was made to neutralize the threat. If a full awakening could be prevented, if key systems could be sabotaged to ensure the tomb never fully activated, then this world could be safely colonized without the Imperium ever knowing about the danger that lurked beneath. The Alpha Legion team penetrated deep into the tomb complex, using their advanced equipment to navigate the lightless corridors, marking their path with molecular traces visible only to their armor's sensors. They reached the central power distribution nexus, a vast chamber where the tomb's energy systems could be manipulated. But the Necrons' defenses were not as dormant as they had assumed. When the Alpha Legion operatives attempted to sabotage the power systems, automated protocols triggered. Doors sealed shut, trapping them in the chamber. The canoptech constructs that had seemed inert suddenly activated, their repair protocols interpreting the sabotage attempt as damage that needed to be corrected. The Alpha Legion fought desperately, but they were deep in enemy territory with no possibility of reinforcement. One by one, the operatives fell until only the Dreadnought remained, its thick armor allowing it to withstand damage that would have killed a standard space marine. The Dreadnought's pilot, recognizing that escape was impossible and that his battle brothers were dead, made a final gambit. He overloaded his Dreadnought's power core, creating an explosion that devastated the power nexus and plunged the tomb back into complete dormancy. The blast should have destroyed the Dreadnought entirely, but the Necron tomb's automated repair systems, interpreting the damaged Dreadnought as just another piece of broken technology, moved it to a stasis vault for eventual repair when resources became available. The Dreadnought's own stasis systems, damaged but still partially functional, activated automatically to preserve the pilot's life. And there it remained, sealed in a tomb within a tomb, neither fully alive nor fully dead, waiting in darkness for an awakening that might never come. 60 million years is an incomprehensible span of time. But for beings in stasis, whether Necron or Space Marine, time has no meaning. The Dreadnought's pilot experienced no passage of years, no dreams, no consciousness of any kind. The minor damage to his stasis systems that would have eventually proved fatal after a few centuries in normal circumstances was irrelevant when measured against the age of the tomb itself. The Necrons slept on, their awakening protocols delayed by the damage the Dreadnought had inflicted, pushing back their return by millennia or more. An alternative scenario, one that speaks more to the Alpha Legion's capacity for long-term planning, suggests that the Dreadnought's presence in the tomb was intentional. The Alpha Legion had discovered the tomb world during the Great Crusade and recognized it as a potential weapon against the Emperor's enemies. Rather than destroying the tomb or reporting it to Imperial authorities, they decided to preserve it for future use. But the tomb needed insurance, some way to ensure it would awaken when the Alpha Legion wanted it to, not according to its own ancient protocols. The Dreadnought was placed in the tomb deliberately, its systems modified to send a specific signal. Once certain conditions were met, a signal that would be detected by the tomb's sensors and interpreted as a command to begin the awakening sequence. This would explain why an Alpha Legion Dreadnought would be found in a Necron tomb. It was meant to be there all along. The pilot might have volunteered for the mission, understanding that he would sleep alongside the Xenos for centuries or even millennia until the Alpha Legion's grand plan reached the point where an awakened Necron tomb world was needed. Or the pilot might have been kept ignorant of his true purpose, told that he was being placed in secure storage for a brief period, unaware that brief would be measured in thousands of years. Given the Alpha Legion's tendency toward compartmentalization and the deployment of unknowing assets, either scenario is plausible. A third possibility involves the Horus Heresy itself and the chaotic years that followed. During the heresy, Necron tomb worlds were the least of anyone's concerns, as the Imperium tore itself apart. It's entirely possible that an Alpha Legion force, fleeing from a failed operation or pursuing some objective known only to themselves, took refuge in what they thought was an abandoned underground complex. The tomb world was still dormant, its external defenses inactive, making it appear to be nothing more than ancient ruins from some long-dead civilization. The Alpha Legion used it as a temporary base of operations, perhaps storing equipment or wounded warriors in stasis until they could be safely retrieved. But then, something went wrong. Perhaps the Legion cell was attacked and wiped out before they could return for their cached resources. Perhaps the heresy's conclusion left the Alpha Legion too scattered and disorganized to mount recovery operations for assets hidden in remote locations. Perhaps the warriors who knew about the cache died or went insane, their knowledge lost with them. The Dreadnought, placed in stasis in what the Alpha Legion thought was a secure location, was simply forgotten, left to sleep in the darkness, while outside the tomb the millennia passed and the Imperium transformed from the Great Crusade's optimism into the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. Or perhaps the most disturbing possibility, the Dreadnought was left there deliberately as part of a scheme so complex that its true purpose won't be revealed for millennia. The Alpha Legion might have known that the tomb world would eventually awaken. They might have calculated that placing one of their own warriors inside would create certain outcomes, set certain events in motion, influence the Necrons' awakening in subtle ways that would serve the Alpha Legion's mysterious agenda. The Dreadnought's pilot might not even be aware that he's a pawn in a game whose rules and objectives he cannot comprehend. A game that might have been set in motion 10,000 years ago by strategists who are long dead. Whatever the specific circumstances, certain factors had to align for this scenario to unfold. The tomb world had to be in a state where its defenses were inactive or compromised, allowing the Alpha Legion to penetrate deep into its interior. The Dreadnought had to be placed in a location where the tomb's automated systems would not immediately destroy it as a foreign object, but would instead attempt to categorize it or even preserve it. The Alpha Legion's presence had to go undetected by any other Imperial forces who might have investigated and retrieved the stranded Dreadnought before the tomb's awakening. And the timing had to be such that the Dreadnought's stasis systems could sustain the pilot for the entire period between his interment and the tomb's eventual awakening. The state of the Dreadnought itself after millennia in stasis would be questionable at best. Even Dreadnought sarcophagi are not designed to function indefinitely without maintenance. The amniotic fluids that preserve the pilot's tissue would gradually degrade, becoming less effective at preventing cellular damage. The neural interfaces might suffer microscopic failures, causing glitches in the connection between pilot and machine. Power cells would slowly drain, even in stasis, potentially leaving the Dreadnought without sufficient energy to activate when finally awakened. It's entirely possible that when the Necrons discovered the Dreadnought, they would find a machine that could not be reactivated, its pilot long dead, despite the preservation system's best efforts. But if the Dreadnought's systems were robust enough, if the Alpha Legion's tech marines had built in sufficient redundancy, if the pilot was lucky and the damage to his stasis systems was minor enough, then it's possible he could survive. Possible that when the tomb world finally began its awakening, when power started flowing through systems that had been dormant for millions of years, that same power might reach the Dreadnought. Its systems might detect the energy, interpret it as a signal to awaken, and begin the process of bringing the pilot back to consciousness. And then, for the first time since he was sealed in the tomb, the Alpha Legion warrior would open his eyes, or rather, activate his senses, and discover that he was no longer alone in the darkness. The discovery, Necron perspective. The awakening of a Necron tomb world follows patterns established 60 million years ago, protocols encoded so deeply into the tomb systems that they function almost like instinct. Power begins to flow through circuits that have lain dormant since before humanity's ancestors descended from the trees. Canoptech constructs stir to life, their quantum cores reactivating, their repair routines assessing the status of the tomb. The process is gradual, methodical, designed to prevent cascade failures that could doom the entire complex. But on this particular tomb world, as the Canoptek scarabs begin their inspection of the stasis vaults and the Canoptek wraiths phase through walls to map structural integrity, they detect an anomaly that should not exist. The first indication comes from the scarabs, those insect-like machines that swarm through the tomb in their billions, each one a microscopic marvel of Necron engineering. They report unusual energy signatures from Vault Sector Gamma 713, a section of the tomb that houses mid-level warriors and lesser nobles. The readings don't match any known Necron technology. The power signature is inconsistent with their quantum cores, the energy pattern all wrong for Necrodermis. And yet, there is clearly something active in that sector, something drawing power from the tomb's newly activated grid, something that had not been present when the Great Sleep began. The Canoptek Overlord, a spider-like construct with processing capabilities far beyond the lesser machines, analyzes the data. Its quantum processors, operating at speeds that would make even the most advanced human cogitators seem like children's toys, run through countless possibilities. Malfunction in the stasis systems, unlikely given the consistency of the readings. Corruption from non-Necron technology that had somehow infiltrated the tomb during the sleep. More probable, but it would represent a catastrophic failure of the tomb's defenses. Evidence of tomb raiders, organics who had penetrated the complex and left behind equipment. The readings were too regular, too sophisticated for primitive organics. The Overlord dispatches a full survey team, a swarm of scarabs to conduct close-range analysis, several wraiths to provide security, and a Canoptek spider to coordinate the investigation and provide heavy support if needed. They converge on Vault Gamma 713, phasing through walls and flowing through access corridors that have not been traversed in epochs. The vault's entrance is sealed, its stasis field still active, but the Canoptek constructs have override codes encoded into their very being. The door opens, with a grinding sound that has not been heard since the age of dinosaurs on Terra, revealing the interior of the vault. What they find defies categorization. The vault is designed to hold stasis crypts, those coffin-like structures that preserve dormant Necrons. Ranks of them line the walls, their status indicators showing that their occupants are still viable, waiting for the awakening protocols to reach this sector. But in the center of the vault, occupying a space where 3 crypts should be, stands something utterly alien to Necron experience. It is clearly a machine of some kind, roughly humanoid in configuration, but larger than any Necron form, made from materials that the scarab's sensors identify as refined metals and ceramics of relatively recent manufacture. Recent meaning within the last 100 million years, as opposed to the tomb's own components which date back to before the biotransference. The Canoptek Overlord's analysis routines struggle to process what its sensors are reporting. The machine has characteristics of both a vehicle and a warsuit, with armaments that suggest military application. But there are organic components as well, life signs so faint that they barely register, coming from a sealed chamber in the machine's torso. The power signature matches no known technology in the Necron's vast databases, which stretch back through the entire history of the Necrontire civilization, and include data on every species they encountered during the war in Heaven. This is something new, something that did not exist when the tomb went into stasis. The logical conclusion is troubling. The galaxy has not remained static during the Great Sleep. New civilizations have risen in the Necron's absence, civilizations with the technology to create war machines that can house living pilots. The implications are significant. If this machine is representative of the current galactic technological level, if the organics have advanced this far in 60 million years, then the Necron's awakening may face far more organized resistance than anticipated. The Silent King's plan assumed that the younger races would still be primitive when the Great Sleep ended, but this machine suggests otherwise. The Canoptek Overlord faces a decision that its programming was never designed to handle. The proper protocol would be to destroy the intrusion immediately, to cleanse the tomb of this foreign contamination before the nobles awaken and discover that the tomb's integrity has been compromised. But the machine might represent valuable intelligence about the current state of the galaxy. If it can be analyzed, if its technology can be reverse-engineered or at least understood, it could provide crucial information for the coming campaigns. Moreover, there are indications that the life signs within the machine, while weak, are stable. The organic pilot is alive, after a fashion, which raises the possibility of interrogation. As the Canoptech overlord processes these factors, the tomb's awakening continues in other sectors. The first nobles are beginning to stir, their consciousness returning from the void of stasis. Among them is Overlord Zandrech. Though it could be any Necron noble, this name serves as an example. A warrior who fought in the wars of secession that preceded even the war in heaven, whose tactical database contains strategies from 1,000 campaigns, whose mind has retained more of the original Necrontyr consciousness than most. He is one of the first to be awakened on this tomb world, which is fitting given his rank and experience. Zandrek's awakening is a gradual process, consciousness returning in fragments. He remembers the last moments before entering stasis, the defeat of the Catan, the shards being sealed away, the Silent King's command to sleep until the galaxy was ready for reclamation. He remembers walking into his stasis crypt, the chamber sealing around him, the familiar sensation of his consciousness dimming. And now, he is awake, his chronometers informing him that 60 million years have passed, though to him it feels like no time at all. His mechanical body is running full diagnostics, checking systems that have been inactive for epochs. Everything appears functional. He is ready to reclaim the galaxy for the Necrons. The cryptech assigned to oversee Zandrek's awakening provides status updates on the tomb world's reactivation. Most systems are functioning within acceptable parameters. The stasis crypts show an acceptable failure rate. Only 12% of the tomb's population were destroyed during the Great Sleep, well within projected tolerances. The tomb's defensive systems are coming online, Gauss cannons and particle whips calibrating their targeting solutions. The dolmen gates that will allow the tomb world to deploy its forces across the galaxy are being tested. Their connection to the webway confirmed stable. It seems the Silent King's plan has worked. The Necrons are awakening to reclaim what was once theirs. Then the cryptech reports the anomaly. A foreign machine has been discovered in one of the vaults, housing an organic life form, drawing power from the tomb's systems. The Canoptech constructs have secured the area, but await orders from the command hierarchy before proceeding. The machine appears to be inactive, but shows signs that it could be reactivated. Analysis suggests it is a war machine of some kind, origin unknown, age estimated at somewhere between 10,000 and 15,000 years, which is barely an eye blink by Necron standards, but suggests it was placed in the tomb relatively recently, in galactic terms. Zandrek's interest is immediately piqued. In his experience, anomalies like this do not occur by accident. Either this represents an invasion attempt that somehow penetrated the tomb's defenses without triggering immediate destruction protocols, or it is evidence of something more complex. The machine has been preserved rather than destroyed, which suggests the tomb's systems did not categorize it as a threat. Was it placed here deliberately? Does it serve some purpose in the tomb's reactivation? Is it a trap, a bomb designed to destroy the tomb when certain conditions are met? The Overlord orders the machine be brought to the central command chamber, where it can be examined more closely. The Canoptech spider carefully lifts the Dreadnought, though Zandrech does not yet know to call it that, and transports it through the tomb's corridors, flanked by wraiths and followed by a swarm of scarabs ready to disassemble the machine at the molecular level if it shows any sign of threatening behavior. The journey takes hours, a procession through a tomb the size of a continent, past vast chambers filled with ranked stasis crypts housing millions of dormant warriors, through galleries where Canoptech constructs perform endless maintenance, across bridges spanning chasms that descend kilometers into the planet's core. When the Dreadnought is finally placed in Zandrek's presence, the Overlord examines it with the analytical precision of a being who has studied warfare for millions of years. The machine is clearly designed for combat, its weapon systems evident even in their powered-down state. One arm terminates in what appears to be a close combat weapon of some kind, though the specific mechanism is unclear. The other bears what looks like a projectile weapon system, primitive by Necron standards, but potentially effective against organic targets. The armor plating is thick, designed to withstand significant punishment, though analysis shows it would be vulnerable to Necron Gauss weaponry. But what truly captures Zandrek's attention is the sealed chamber in the machine's torso, the sarcophagus that houses the organic pilot. Life support systems indicate that the organic within is alive, its biological processes slowed to a near halt by some form of stasis technology. It is crude compared to Necron stasis systems, but effective enough to have preserved the organic for however many millennia it has been sealed within the machine. The readings suggest the organic is heavily augmented, far beyond natural biological capability, which raises interesting questions about what species it belongs to and what civilization produced it. Zandrek consults with the Cryptex, those master technologists who serve as the Necron's scientists and engineers. They analyze the machine's construction, its materials and power systems, attempting to determine its origin. The alloys used in its construction are identified as refined metals typical of late stellar era civilizations, nothing particularly advanced, but showing competent metallurgy. The power systems appear to be some form of contained fusion reaction. Again, nothing sophisticated by Necron standards, but surprisingly effective for its compact size. The most interesting component is the neural interface system, connecting the organic pilot to the machine's controls, a technology that shows surprising sophistication in its implementation. One of the Cryptex makes an observation that changes the entire context of the discovery. Based on analysis of the machine's design aesthetics and comparison with fragmented data from the tomb's archives, this appears to be human technology. The markings on the machine's armor, though corroded by time, match patterns associated with the species that the Necrons encountered during some of their previous partial awakenings, the species that calls itself humanity and has spread across the galaxy like a plague. If this is true, if this machine and its pilot are human, then it represents something unprecedented, a human war machine that has somehow survived for millennia, buried in a Necron tomb. The question becomes, what to do with it? Simply destroying the machine would be the safest option, eliminating the foreign contamination from the tomb and ensuring no complications arise from its presence. But Zandrek is a strategist who has won countless campaigns through intelligence gathering and careful analysis of enemy capabilities. This machine could provide invaluable information about humanity's current military strength. If its pilot can be awakened and interrogated, if the machine's weapon systems can be studied and their weaknesses identified, if the technology can be reverse-engineered to develop countermeasures, then the value of this discovery could far exceed the minor security risk it represents. There is another consideration as well, one that Zandrek acknowledges only to himself. The very presence of this machine in the tomb is an affront, an intrusion into a space that should have remained pristine and inviolate. The idea that humans have penetrated a Necron tomb world, even if only to leave behind one of their war machines, suggests a level of competence and daring that demands respect. The appropriate response is not immediate destruction, which would be wasteful, but interrogation, study, and eventual elimination once all useful intelligence has been extracted. Let the organic pilot awaken. Let him see the might of the Necron dynasties. Let him understand the futility of resistance. Let him provide answers to the questions that his presence has raised. And then, once he has served his purpose, he can be granted the destruction his intrusion has earned. Zandrek orders that the machine be placed in a secure chamber, a vault equipped with stasis fields and defensive systems that can contain even the most dangerous threats. Power feeds are connected to its systems, allowing it to draw energy in a controlled manner. Sensors are positioned to monitor every aspect of its operation, to detect any attempt at activation or communication with outside forces. And then, with all precautions in place, the Overlord gives the command that will set in motion an encounter that neither side could have predicted. Begin the process of awakening the machine and its pilot. Let us see what secrets this human war machine holds. The awakening, when machines meet. The first sensation is pain. Not the acute pain of fresh wounds, but a dull, pervasive ache that speaks of damage incompletely healed, of systems degraded by time, of a body pushed far beyond the limits of what was ever meant to endure. For the pilot of the Dreadnought, awakening from stasis is always disorienting, consciousness emerging from absolute void to find itself once more bound to the massive metal body that serves as both prison and second skin. But this awakening is different. The protocols are wrong, the systems booting up in sequences that don't match the familiar patterns programmed by the Legion's tech marines. Awareness returns gradually, in layers. First come the most basic systems: power flow monitoring, structural integrity assessment, life support status. The pilot's brain, connected to the Dreadnought's machine spirit, through neural interfaces that blur the boundary between flesh and steel, automatically processes these data streams, forming a picture of his physical status. The power cells are charged, but the energy signature is strange, not matching the standard output of Imperial power plants. Life support is functional, but showing minor fluctuations that suggest the system has been offline for longer than normal, possibly much longer. Structural integrity is nominal. Armor plating intact, though showing signs of environmental degradation consistent with extended exposure to an atmosphere with unusual chemical composition. External sensors come online next, and with them comes the pilot's first glimpse of his surroundings. What he sees makes no sense. He is in a chamber, that much is clear, but its geometry is all wrong. The walls meet at angles that hurt to perceive even through digital sensors, their surfaces covered with hieroglyphics and bas-reliefs depicting scenes that his tactical database cannot identify. The architecture is clearly artificial, but follows design principles that no human civilization has ever employed. The lighting comes from sources he cannot identify, a pale green glow that emanates from the walls themselves, rather than from any visible fixtures. And the air, when his atmospheric sensors analyze its composition, shows exotic particles that should not exist in nature, quantum signatures that suggest the presence of technology operating at a level beyond anything the Imperium has achieved. The pilot's confusion is compounded by his memory of how he came to be here. The last clear recollection he has is of, but here, the memories become fragmentary, uncertain. Was he being placed in stasis for scheduled hibernation? Was he damaged in battle, his systems shut down for emergency repairs? The neural degradation that comes with extended Dreadnought internment makes long-term memory increasingly unreliable, and the pilot cannot be certain whether his last clear memory was from a century ago or yesterday. The Dreadnought's own logs, which should provide a complete record of its operational history, are corrupted or missing entirely. The data storage systems showing signs of having been wiped or severely damaged at some point in the past. What is certain is that he is not in any location he recognizes as an Imperial facility. The architecture alone eliminates that possibility. The technology surrounding him is clearly advanced, but utterly alien in its design philosophy. And there is something else, a presence that his sensors detect but cannot fully quantify. He is being watched. Multiple monitoring systems are focused on his position, analyzing him with a thoroughness that speaks of clinical examination rather than simple surveillance. Whatever has awakened him, whatever has brought power to his systems after what might have been an eternity of darkness, it is studying him with the focused attention of a predator examining potential prey. The pilot attempts to access his communication systems, to broadcast on standard Imperial frequencies for potential rescue or support. But the channels are dead, either jammed by some external force or simply inoperative due to damage. He tries to move, to test the responsiveness of his Dreadnought's limbs, but discovers that he is physically restrained. Force fields of some kind have been deployed around his position, not strong enough to prevent all movement, but sufficient to prevent any sudden action. The analysis routines built into his tactical sensors identify these fields as similar to conversion field technology used in the highest levels of Imperial science, but far more sophisticated in their implementation and control. For the first time in his existence, the Alpha Legion warrior feels something he has not experienced since before his interment in the Dreadnought: genuine uncertainty. The Legion's training is extensive, covering every conceivable tactical situation, preparing its warriors for operations under the most extreme conditions. But this scenario, awakening in an alien facility of unknown origin, restrained and monitored by an unknown force, was not covered in any briefing or training scenario. The standard protocols for capture by enemy forces do not apply when the enemy's very nature is a mystery. His tactical database, normally filled with contingency plans and operational protocols for countless situations, offers nothing useful for his current predicament. Then the aliens reveal themselves. The pilot's sensors detect movement in the chamber, multiple entities entering through a doorway that had not been visible until it opened. What he sees defies his ability to process. They are humanoid in their basic configuration, bipedal with 2 arms and a head, but everything else about them is utterly wrong. Their bodies are made of metal, but it is metal that moves with the fluid grace of living flesh, surfaces that shift and reconfigure themselves as needed. Their faces, if faces is even the right word, are skull-like constructions of overlapping plates, eyes that glow with an inner light that is not entirely physical. They carry weapons of designs the pilot has never seen, devices that his threat assessment systems immediately categorize as high-priority dangers based on their energy signatures alone. The beings regard him in silence, and the pilot becomes aware that they are communicating, but not through any method he can intercept. There are no Vox transmissions, no radio frequencies, nothing his sensors can detect. Yet the way they move in coordination, the manner in which they position themselves around his Dreadnought with tactical precision, makes it clear that they are sharing information and making decisions. One of them, distinguished from the others by more elaborate adornments and a bearing that suggests command authority, approaches more closely than the rest. Its empty eyes regard them up, Dreadnought with what might be curiosity, though attributing human emotions to something so clearly inhuman is probably a mistake. The pilot attempts to activate his weapons, to at least demonstrate that he is not helpless, but discovers that control has been locked out of those systems. Someone or something has interfaced with his Dreadnought's machine spirit, overriding his command protocols, preventing him from accessing the assault cannon and power fist that are his primary means of defending himself. It is a violation of a magnitude he has difficulty processing, the equivalent of having his own limbs rendered immobile by an outside force. The Dreadnought's weapons are not separate from him. They are extensions of his body, as much a part of him as his arms were before he was interred. To have them rendered inoperative feels like being paralyzed. The being that the pilot assumes is the leader makes a gesture, and one of the others approaches carrying what can only be described as a piece of advanced technology, though its specific function is unclear. The device is applied to the Dreadnought's sarcophagus, and the pilot feels something attempting to interface with his neural links, probing at the connections between his biological brain and the Dreadnought's systems. It is an invasive sensation, deeply uncomfortable in ways that purely physical pain cannot match. Whatever these beings are, they are attempting to access his consciousness directly, to extract information from the neural pathways that govern his thoughts and memories. The pilot's training finally provides guidance. Resist, deny, deceive. These are the core principles of Alpha Legion operational security. Even under the most extreme duress, even when capture seems inevitable, information control remains paramount. The pilot triggers defensive protocols hard-coded into his neural interfaces, mental exercises designed to compartmentalize his memories, to hide critical information behind layers of false data and misleading narratives. It is a technique that requires tremendous mental discipline, especially given the degraded state of his consciousness after extended Dreadnought internment. But he is an Alpha Legion warrior, and information security is as fundamental to his nature as the ability to fight. But as the alien device continues its work, the pilot realizes that these beings possess technological sophistication far beyond anything he has encountered. The probes attempting to access his mind are not crude psychological interrogation techniques, or even the relatively sophisticated methods employed by the Inquisition's best interrogators. These are direct interfaces with his neural tissue, bypassing the conscious mind entirely and attempting to access his memories at the level of electrical patterns stored in neurons. The defensive protocols that might have protected him from conventional interrogation are only partially effective against this fundamentally different approach. What follows is a strange and silent struggle, a battle fought not with weapons but with information and willpower. The pilot attempts to think about anything other than critical intelligence, filling his conscious mind with trivia and false memories, while trying to keep the genuinely important information sequestered where the probes cannot reach it. The aliens, for their part, demonstrate patience and methodical thoroughness that speaks to experience with this kind of investigation. They do not rush, do not attempt to force access to protected areas of memory, instead systematically mapping the pilot's neural architecture and identifying the strongest defensive barriers so they can focus their efforts more effectively. Hours pass, or perhaps days. The pilot has lost the ability to accurately track time, his chronometric systems having been compromised by whatever is interfacing with his brain. He becomes aware that the aliens are learning, their techniques becoming more effective with each attempt, their probes reaching deeper into his consciousness despite his best efforts at resistance. It is a losing battle, and the pilot knows it. Eventually, they will extract whatever information they want, and there is nothing he can do to prevent it. The only question is how much damage he can do to the integrity of that information before they finally bypass his defenses, how many false leads and contradictory data points he can inject into their intelligence gathering. Then something unexpected happens. The probing suddenly stops, and the aliens withdraw the device from contact with his sarcophagus. The pilot, his consciousness exhausted from the mental strain of resisting the interrogation, tries to understand what has changed. Have they given up? Have they decided he's not worth the effort? Or have they already extracted everything they need and decided that further interrogation would yield nothing of value? Through his external senses, he watches as the aliens confer with one another in that silent manner that he still cannot intercept or comprehend. The leader makes another gesture, and the force fields surrounding the Dreadnought are adjusted, loosened slightly. The pilot realizes with a start that this might be an opportunity. If he can regain control of his weapons systems, if he can launch an attack before the aliens can react, he might be able to fight his way out of whatever this facility is. It would almost certainly be a suicide mission. Even at full functionality, he would be one Dreadnought against an unknown number of hostile Xenos, with technology that outmatches anything the Imperium has created. But dying in battle would be preferable to remaining a captive, a source of intelligence for enemies of humanity. But before he can act on this thought, the leader does something that stops the pilot in his tracks. It speaks, not in the crude mechanical voice the pilot might have expected from a robot or android, but in fluent, grammatically perfect Gothic, the common language of the Imperium. The voice has an unusual quality to it, a slight metallic undertone that betrays its artificial origin, but the words are clear and unmistakable. Human warrior, we would speak with you of matters of mutual concern. Your continued resistance serves neither your interests nor ours. Will you parley, or must we continue our examination of your neural architecture until we have extracted all information of value? The pilot is so stunned by this development that for a moment he cannot formulate a response. These aliens, whoever or whatever they are, have not only learned Gothic, but speak it with a precision that suggests deep understanding of human linguistic structures. More importantly, they are offering negotiation, which implies they see him as something more than simply a specimen to be dissected and studied. This introduces an entirely new set of tactical considerations. The Alpha Legion has extensive training in negotiation and psychological manipulation, but all of it assumes negotiating with other humans, or at least with species whose thought processes can be understood through analogy to human psychology. How does one negotiate with beings whose very nature is a mystery? Still, negotiation offers possibilities that resistance does not. If he can engage these beings in dialogue, he can gather intelligence about them, learn their capabilities and perhaps their intentions. Every moment of communication is an opportunity to observe, to analyze, to look for weaknesses that might be exploited. And if these beings believe he is willing to cooperate, they may lower their guard, provide him with opportunities that would not exist if they kept him under maximum security. It is a risky strategy, but the Alpha Legion has always specialized in turning disadvantageous situations into opportunities through clever manipulation. The pilot activates his external Vox systems, his mechanical voice emerging from the Dreadnought speakers with the grinding quality that comes from centuries of use. I am a servant of the Emperor of mankind. I demand to know where I am, who you are, and by what authority you have detained me. It is a statement designed to establish his own identity while probing for information, to see how these beings react to invocations of imperial authority and religious devotion. The alien leader's response is immediate and carries undertones that might be amusement if such emotions can be attributed to beings made of living metal. Emperor, mankind. These are new words to us, or at least new in the form you use them. Your species has clearly developed delusions of grandeur during our absence from galactic affairs. But such theological discussions can wait. You are in the tomb world of the Zarakan dynasty, in a vault that should have contained only the stasis crypts of our lesser warriors. Your presence here represents a mystery we intend to solve. As for who we are, the being pauses, and for a moment, the pilot could swear it is savoring the drama of the revelation. We are the Necrons, rightful masters of the galaxy, and you, human, have had the extreme misfortune of awakening alongside us. Tactical analysis, mind games in the tomb. The confrontation between the Alpha Legion Dreadnought and the awakening Necrons is not a simple matter of comparing weapons specifications and determining which side has superior firepower. It is a meeting of two philosophies of warfare, two approaches to conflict that share surprising similarities despite emerging from completely different origins and operating across incomprehensible spans of time. Both the Necrons and the Alpha Legion are forces that value intelligence over brute strength, that prioritize information control and psychological manipulation, that seek to defeat enemies before battles are even joined. When such forces meet, the resulting confrontation becomes less about physical combat and more about determining who can best exploit the other's weaknesses while protecting their own. From the Necrons' perspective, the Dreadnought represents both a puzzle to be solved and a potential asset to be exploited. The immediate tactical situation heavily favors the Necrons. The Dreadnought is deep within their tomb world, surrounded by millions of warriors and thousands of sophisticated war machines, cut off from any possibility of reinforcement or rescue. Even if the pilot managed to regain control of his weapon systems, even if he fought with perfect efficiency, he would eventually be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The rational assessment is that the human poses no significant threat and can be contained, studied, and eventually destroyed at the Necrons' convenience. But rationality is not the same as wisdom, and the Necrons are nothing, if not wise, through the accumulation of millions of years of experience. The very presence of the Dreadnought in their tomb suggests capabilities they did not expect from the younger species of the galaxy. Humans have demonstrated the ability to construct war machines that can preserve their pilots across millennia, to penetrate to the heart of a Necron tomb world without triggering immediate destruction, and to employ stasis technology sophisticated enough that the tomb's own systems did not recognize it as a threat. These are not the accomplishments of primitives. They suggest a level of technological development and tactical acumen that demands respect. The Overlord commanding the tomb's awakening, we continue to use Zahandrek as our example, begins a systematic analysis of the situation, drawing on tactical principles refined over millions of years of warfare. The first question is the most obvious. How did this machine come to be here? The possible explanations are limited. Either it was deliberately placed as part of some human operation, in which case its presence might be part of a larger plan that the Necrons need to uncover, or it was left here accidentally, the result of some catastrophic failure of a human operation that went wrong in ways that left no other survivors to retrieve this stranded warrior. The information available does not yet allow definitive determination of which scenario is correct. The second question is more complex. What does this human know, and how can that knowledge be extracted most efficiently? Initial interrogation attempts have revealed that the human's mind is protected by surprisingly sophisticated defenses, mental conditioning that allows him to compartmentalize information and resist direct neural scanning to a degree that the Necrons did not expect from an organic mind. This suggests military or intelligence training far beyond what would be necessary for a simple soldier, which implies the human might belong to one of humanity's elite organizations. If true, the intelligence value of this captive could be significant. The third question is the most dangerous. Is this a trap? The Alpha Legion specializes in deception and misdirection, and while the Necrons do not yet know they are dealing with Alpha Legion forces specifically, the sophistication of the countermeasures they have encountered suggests they are dealing with humans who think strategically about information security. Could the Dreadnought have been left in the tomb deliberately, designed to appear vulnerable while actually serving as a surveillance platform or even a weapon designed to activate at some predetermined moment? The possibility cannot be dismissed, which means any interrogation or study of the machine must proceed with caution. From the Alpha Legion pilot's perspective, the tactical situation is far more desperate, but not entirely hopeless. He is trapped in enemy territory with no prospect of rescue or reinforcement. His weapons systems are under the aliens' control, and his captors possess technology that can interface directly with his neural patterns, despite his best efforts at resistance. By any objective measure, his situation is completely compromised. But the Alpha Legion's training has prepared its warriors for exactly this kind of scenario, for situations where conventional tactics have failed and only guile and deception remain as viable options. The pilot's first advantage, and it is a slender one, is that the Necrons do not yet fully understand what they are dealing with. They know he is human, they know he is a warrior, but they do not yet know he belongs to the Alpha Legion, do not yet understand the full implications of capturing someone who has spent his entire existence training in the arts of deception and counterintelligence. Every question they ask, every attempt to extract information, is an opportunity for him to feed them carefully crafted lies, mixed with enough truth to maintain credibility. If he can successfully mislead them about his origins, his mission, and his knowledge of their capabilities, he might be able to create opportunities for escape, or at least ensure that the intelligence they extract from him is worse than useless, actively leading them toward false conclusions about humanity's capabilities and intentions. The second advantage is time. The Necrons have just awakened from 60 million years of stasis, and while their individual memories may be intact, their understanding of the current galactic situation is necessarily limited. They will be gathering intelligence about the state of the galaxy, trying to determine what threats and opportunities exist in this transformed universe. The pilot can use their need for information against them, volunteering select pieces of intelligence that serve to misdirect their strategic planning while appearing to cooperate with his interrogation. For example, he might provide accurate information about the locations of Imperial military installations, but exaggerate their strength and capabilities to make the Necrons believe humanity is more formidable than it actually is. Or he might provide false information about interspecies alliances, suggesting that humanity has powerful Xenos allies who would respond to any Necron aggression. The third advantage, and perhaps the most valuable, is that the very sophistication of his defensive mental conditioning is providing him with intelligence about Necron capabilities. Every probing attempt, every interrogation session, reveals something about their technology and methods. He is learning how their neural interfaces work, what kinds of information they are prioritizing in their questioning, what gaps exist in their understanding of human psychology and culture. This information might seem useless when he is a captive, with no means of communicating it to the wider Imperium, but the Alpha Legion's training emphasizes that intelligence has value, even if its application is not immediately obvious. Perhaps he will find a way to escape and report what he has learned. Perhaps the information will be useful in the final moments of his life, when he makes whatever last stand his situation permits. Either way, knowledge is never wasted. The technological comparison between the two forces is stark. The Necrons possess weapons that operate on principles the Imperium barely understands, much less can replicate. Their Gauss weaponry can disassemble matter at the atomic level, a capability that makes even the Imperium's most advanced weapons seem primitive by comparison. Their phase technology allows them to shift between different dimensional states, passing through solid matter or rendering themselves temporarily invulnerable to conventional attacks. Their living metal bodies can repair damage that would permanently destroy Imperial technology, with warriors literally rebuilding themselves from scattered components. And their command of temporal physics allows them to manipulate time itself in localized areas, aging enemy equipment into uselessness or reversing damage to their own forces. Against this, the Dreadnought's weapons are crude but effective within their operational parameters. The assault cannon is a relatively straightforward kinetic weapon system, hurling high-velocity projectiles that rely on mass and velocity to cause damage. The Power Fist generates a disruption field that allows it to literally tear apart enemy vehicles and structures through the application of tremendous force. Both weapon systems would be effective against many of humanity's enemies, but against Necrons, they face significant challenges. The living metal bodies of Necron warriors can potentially recover from damage that would kill any organic being, and their quantum shielding can redirect incoming fire before it ever reaches their physical forms. But raw firepower is not everything, especially when fighting an opponent who values strategy and tactics. The Dreadnought's real strength lies not in its weapons, but in the tactical acumen of its pilot, the accumulated experience of centuries of warfare compressed into the damaged but still functional brain preserved within its sarcophagus. The pilot understands combined arms warfare. He knows how to identify and exploit enemy weaknesses. He has trained extensively in asymmetric combat against technologically superior opponents. Given an opportunity, given just a moment of enemy overconfidence or a gap in their defensive perimeter, he could potentially escape his immediate confinement and create chaos that might last long enough for him to achieve some tactical objective, even if ultimate escape proves impossible. The psychological dimension of the confrontation adds another layer of complexity. The Necrons, despite their mechanical bodies, are not simple machines. They retain the consciousness and, to varying degrees, the personalities of the Necrontyr they once were. They can think creatively, can appreciate irony, can potentially be subject to psychological manipulation if the correct approach is found. The overlord conducting the interrogation is likely a being of immense pride, someone who commanded armies when humanity's ancestors were still single-celled organisms. Playing to that pride, suggesting that the human respects the Necrons' obvious superiority, while subtly implying that humanity has achieved things that might surprise even such ancient beings, could create openings for manipulation. Similarly, the pilot's psychology is a factor the Necrons must consider. He is not simply a soldier following orders, but someone who has chosen to continue serving even after suffering wounds that should have killed him. Someone who has endured centuries of intermittent consciousness and gradual mental deterioration in service to his cause. That level of dedication suggests a mind that cannot be easily broken through threats or torture. The Necron's best chance of extracting useful intelligence lies not in trying to overwhelm his defenses, but in offering something he wants, information about his situation perhaps, or the possibility of survival, in exchange for his cooperation. The information warfare aspects of the situation are particularly complex. Both sides are attempting to gather intelligence about the other while revealing as little as possible about themselves. The Necrons want to know what humanity has become, what capabilities they possess, what threats they might pose to the awakening dynasties. The pilot wants to know what the Necrons are planning, how many of them are awakening, what technologies they possess that might be reported back to the Imperium if he somehow escapes. Every question asked, every answer given, is part of a larger game where the true objective is not immediate tactical advantage, but long-term strategic positioning. The Alpha Legion's philosophy of "I am Alpharius" becomes particularly relevant in this context. The pilot knows that he is not unique, not irreplaceable. The Legion has countless other operatives, any of whom could take up his mission if he falls. His death would be regrettable, but not catastrophic to the Legion's overall plans, whatever those plans might be. This knowledge provides a certain freedom in his decision-making. He can take risks that other Space Marines might not, can commit to courses of action that have low probability of success, because his individual survival is not the primary objective. What matters is accomplishing something useful with whatever time remains to him. From both perspectives, the situation is fluid and dangerous. The Necrons hold all the obvious advantages, but face an opponent whose specialization is turning disadvantageous situations into opportunities. The pilot is trapped and outmatched, but possesses training and mental conditioning that make him far more dangerous than his current position would suggest. Neither side can afford to underestimate the other. Neither can relax their vigilance for even a moment. The tomb, world, vast and ancient, becomes the stage for a confrontation that could have implications far beyond the immediate fates of the individuals involved. Every conversation between captor and captive is a battle of wits. Every exchange of information is a calculated gamble. And somewhere in the darkness of the tomb, systems continue to awaken. More Necrons emerging from stasis, the full strength of the dynasty slowly manifesting as the Great Sleep ends, and the ancient masters of the galaxy return to reclaim what they believe is rightfully theirs. Possible outcomes and scenarios. The confrontation between the Alpha Legion Dreadnought and the awakening Necrons could resolve in numerous ways, each with dramatically different implications for both the immediate participants and the broader conflict between the Imperium and the Necron dynasties. The outcome depends on factors that include the specific capabilities and conditions of both the Dreadnought and the Tomb World, the personalities and decision-making processes of the individuals involved, and the element of chance that can never be entirely eliminated from any tactical situation. Let us examine several of the most plausible scenarios and their potential consequences. Scenario 1. Violent confrontation and destruction. This is perhaps the most straightforward outcome, and the one that initial circumstances seem to favor. The Necrons, having extracted whatever intelligence they deem valuable from the Dreadnought pilot, through a combination of neural scanning and interrogation, decide that the continued presence of the war machine represents an unacceptable security risk. The Overlord orders its destruction, and the Dreadnought is torn apart by Necron warriors using their Gauss weaponry, the living metal body of the pilot disintegrating layer by layer until nothing remains but scattered atoms. The information extracted during interrogation provides the Necrons with useful intelligence about current Imperial military capabilities, but nothing that significantly changes their strategic calculations. In this scenario, the Alpha Legion loses a warrior and a valuable Dreadnought, but given the Legion's cell-based structure and operational redundancy, this is a manageable loss. The specific knowledge possessed by this one pilot was not unique enough that its loss compromises any critical operations. The Necrons, for their part, have eliminated a potential threat and gained some insight into the species that now inhabits the galaxy they once ruled. The incident becomes a footnote in both factions' histories, significant to the individuals involved, but not dramatically impacting the larger conflicts playing out across the galaxy. Scenario 2. Escape and intelligence coup. Despite the overwhelming advantages held by his captors, the Alpha Legion pilot manages to engineer an escape through a combination of deception, exploitation of the Necrons' unfamiliarity with human psychology, and simple luck. Perhaps he convinces the Necrons that he requires access to his Dreadnought's primary systems for some plausible reason, regains control of his weapons, and fights his way out of immediate confinement. Perhaps he exploits confusion during the tomb's awakening process, when systems are still coming online and coordination between Necron forces is imperfect. Perhaps he manages to access the tomb's dimensional gates or other transportation systems and phases himself to a location from which escape becomes possible. Once free of the tomb, the pilot represents an intelligence asset of incalculable value. He has first-hand knowledge of Necron capabilities, has observed their technology and tactics from within their own stronghold, has potentially identified weaknesses in their systems and procedures that could be exploited in future engagements. If he can somehow transmit this information to the Imperium, or more likely, to other Alpha Legion cells operating in the region, it could provide crucial intelligence for defending against the awakening Necron threat. The pilot's escape would also deliver a psychological blow to the Necrons, demonstrating that even in their own tomb worlds they are not invulnerable, that younger species have developed capabilities that can challenge even the galaxy's ancient masters. Scenario 3. Uneasy alliance. This scenario may seem unlikely at first consideration, but becomes more plausible when examined through the lens of both factions' pragmatic approaches to warfare. The Alpha Legion pilot, recognizing that he cannot escape and cannot defeat his captors through direct confrontation, offers a deal: his cooperation and the intelligence he possesses in exchange for his release, or at least his continued survival. The Necron overlord, pragmatic and experienced in the complexities of galactic politics, recognizes that a cooperative human agent could potentially be more valuable than a dead or destroyed one. The arrangement might take several forms. The Necrons could attempt to turn the pilot into an unwitting or willing asset, releasing him back into Imperial space, while using him as a vector for false information designed to mislead humanity's military planners. The pilot, trained in exactly these kinds of operations, would be simultaneously working to feed false intelligence back to the Necrons, while extracting genuine information from his contacts with them. The resulting web of double crosses and triple crosses could become Byzantine in its complexity, with neither side entirely certain whether they are the manipulator or the manipulated. Alternatively, the alliance could be more straightforward. The Necrons might recognize that humans have no love for certain other species in the galaxy, the Tyranids, for instance, or particular chaos forces, and propose a temporary arrangement of mutual non-aggression or even limited cooperation against common enemies. The Alpha Legion, whose true loyalties have always been questionable and whose strategic calculations operate on timescales measured in millennia, might see value in such an arrangement, especially if it creates opportunities to gather intelligence about Necron capabilities and intentions. Scenario 4. The long game revealed. The most disturbing scenario from humanity's perspective is that the Dreadnought's presence in the tomb was always intentional, part of an Alpha Legion plan so elaborate that it spans millennia and involves resources and contingencies that no normal military operation would contemplate. In this scenario, the Dreadnought was placed in the tomb thousands of years ago with specific objectives: to gather intelligence about Necron awakening protocols, to influence the tomb's reactivation in subtle ways that serve Alpha Legion purposes, or even to act as a sleeper agent whose true programming only activates under specific conditions that the Necron's awakening has now triggered. This possibility is particularly disturbing because it suggests the Alpha Legion has been planning for the Necron's return for longer than the Imperium has known about the Necron's existence. It implies levels of strategic foresight and information about the galaxy's deep history that humanity is not supposed to possess. If true, it raises uncomfortable questions about what else the Alpha Legion knows, what other pieces they have positioned around the galaxy's chessboard, what game they are playing that requires such extraordinary patience and planning. In this scenario, the Dreadnought pilot himself might not even be aware of his true purpose. His conscious mind might genuinely believe he is a stranded warrior trying to survive and escape, while his subconscious contains programming installed by long-dead Alpha Legion tech marines, instructions that will activate when the proper triggers are met. The Necrons, sophisticated as they are, might not detect these deeper layers of conditioning, might not realize that by awakening the Dreadnought and studying it, they are actually furthering some Alpha Legion objective that was set in motion before any human alive today was born. Scenario 5. Mutual destruction. The darkest outcome sees the confrontation escalating beyond anyone's ability to control it. Perhaps the pilot, recognizing that his situation is hopeless and that he is providing valuable intelligence to humanity's enemies merely by being interrogated, chooses to destroy himself and take as many Necrons with him as possible. He overloads his Dreadnought's power core, creating an explosion that devastates a significant portion of the Tomb World's command infrastructure. The blast doesn't destroy the tomb entirely. Necron construction is too robust for that. But it sets back the awakening process by centuries, or even millennia, buying time for humanity even at the cost of his own existence. The Necrons, enraged by this act of sabotage, might respond with overwhelming force against the nearest Imperial holdings, seeing the incident as evidence that humanity poses an unacceptable threat to their awakening dynasties. What might have been a gradual, measured return to galactic prominence becomes instead an immediate and violent campaign of extermination against human worlds in the tomb's vicinity. Planets are scoured clean of life, populations reduced to atoms by weapons that would make even the Imperium's exterminatus protocols look gentle by comparison. Scenario 6. Unexpected complications. The presence of the Dreadnought in the tomb might trigger complications that neither side anticipated. Perhaps the Dreadnought's power signature, while initially seeming harmless, actually interferes with critical tomb systems in ways that become apparent only after full awakening has begun. Stasis crypts that should have contained viable Necrons instead reveal warriors damaged beyond the ability of even living metal to repair. Dimensional gates that should allow the tomb's forces to deploy across the galaxy malfunction, stranding invasion forces in the webway, or depositing them in random locations throughout the galaxy. The tomb's canoptech constructs, confused by the conflicting signals from Necron systems and the Dreadnought's technology, begin behaving erratically, attacking both intruders and the awakening Necrons without discrimination. In this scenario, what should have been a straightforward security matter becomes a crisis that threatens the entire tomb world's viability. The Overlord must choose between dealing with the immediate threat posed by the Dreadnought and addressing the systemic problems that its presence has revealed or created. The pilot, recognizing that his captors are distracted by these larger concerns, might find opportunities for escape or at least for causing additional disruption that could save lives elsewhere in the galaxy, even if it costs his own. Each of these scenarios leads to different implications for the broader conflict between humanity and the Necrons. A violent resolution might convince Necron strategists that humanity poses no significant threat and can be dealt with at the dynasty's convenience, leading to overconfidence that could be exploited in future engagements. A successful escape might alert the Necrons to the fact that humans are more capable and dangerous than their primitive technology might suggest, leading to more cautious and thorough planning in future operations. An alliance, even a temporary one, might create opportunities for intelligence gathering that would not otherwise exist, but also risks exposing both sides to manipulation and betrayal. The revelation of a long-term Alpha Legion plan would recontextualize not just this incident, but potentially centuries of Imperium-Xenos interaction, forcing a re-evaluation of countless historical events through the lens of possible Alpha Legion involvement. The broader implications. The encounter between the Alpha Legion, Dreadnought, and the awakening Necron tomb world, regardless of its specific outcome, represents something larger than the fate of individual warriors or even the security of a single tomb world. It is a collision point between two of the galaxy's most secretive and strategically minded factions, a meeting that has implications for the broader conflicts that define the 41st millennium. The ripples from this encounter could spread far beyond the immediate participants, influencing military planning, intelligence operations, and strategic calculations across multiple factions and species. For the Imperium of Man, the existence of an Alpha Legion dreadnought that somehow ended up buried in a Necron tomb raises disturbing questions about what other operations the Legion has conducted that have never been discovered or understood. The Alpha Legion's capabilities for infiltration, their access to Imperial technology and secrets, their ability to plan operations that span centuries or millennia, all of these suggest that they may have placed assets in locations throughout the galaxy whose purposes may only become apparent years or decades after their placement. If one dreadnought can end up in a Necron tomb, what other surprises might be waiting in other hidden locations, ticking time bombs whose detonation won't occur until specific conditions are met? The Inquisition, should they learn of this incident, would likely initiate investigations that could span decades. Questions would be raised about which Alpha Legion force placed the dreadnought in the tomb, when this occurred, what their objective was, and whether the operation was successful or failed. More troublingly, questions would arise about what the Alpha Legion knows about Necron technology and tomb world locations that they have never shared with Imperial authorities. This knowledge suggests intelligence capabilities far beyond what most Imperial officials believe the traitor legions possess, implying that the Alpha Legion has maintained sophisticated intelligence-gathering operations throughout their supposed exile from Imperial space. For the Necron dynasties, this incident would serve as a wake-up call about the changed state of the galaxy. The humans they remember from their previous partial awakenings, if they remember humans at all, were primitive ape descendants, with barely the capability for stone tools, much less sophisticated military technology. To discover that these apes have now developed star-spanning empires, have created war machines that can preserve their warriors across millennia, and possess the capability to penetrate Necron tomb worlds, forces a fundamental reassessment of the threat level posed by the younger species. The contempt that many Necrons feel for organics would need to be tempered with practical recognition of humanity's capabilities. This reassessment could lead to significant changes in Necron strategic planning. Tomb worlds that are awakening might prioritize intelligence gathering about human capabilities over immediate military action. The cryptex would want to study captured human technology, not just to understand its mechanisms, but to identify weaknesses that could be exploited. The Necron dynasties might begin dedicating resources to understanding human psychology and culture, recognizing that defeating an enemy requires understanding how they think and what motivates them. Some overlords might even advocate for diplomatic approaches, recognizing that while humans are inferior to Necrons in technology and longevity, they have demonstrated capacities for innovation and adaptation that could make them useful allies against other threats. The Tyranids, for instance, who threaten to consume all biomass in the galaxy, including any organic populations the Necrons might want to preserve for their own purposes. For the Alpha Legion itself, the recovery or loss of the Dreadnought would inform future operations but probably would not fundamentally change their strategic approach. The Legion has always operated on the assumption that individual assets will be lost, that operations will fail, that plans will need to be modified based on changing circumstances. What matters is the overall trajectory of their grand strategy, whatever that strategy might actually be. If the Dreadnought's mission was to gather intelligence about Necron capabilities, then whether that intelligence is successfully transmitted or lost with the Dreadnought's destruction, the mission has at least partially succeeded by confirming that Necron tomb worlds exist and are awakening. If the mission was something else entirely, something so compartmentalized that even the Dreadnought's pilot didn't know the full objective, then the mission's success or failure might not be apparent for centuries. The technological implications of this encounter could also prove significant. Both sides would have gained exposure to the other's technology under circumstances that allow for detailed study. The Necrons' examination of the Dreadnought would provide them with insights into Imperial engineering, life support systems, and neural interface technology. While none of this would be particularly advanced by Necron standards, it would give them a baseline understanding of human capabilities that could inform future operations. They might identify specific weaknesses in Imperial technology that can be exploited, or recognize principles that humans have developed that, while crude, might have applications the Necrons had not considered. Conversely, the Alpha Legion pilot's observations of Necron technology, assuming he survives long enough to report them, would be invaluable to Imperial military planning. Details about how Necron stasis systems function, how their living metal repairs damage, how their dimensional gates operate, all of this would provide the Adeptus Mechanicus with research directions that might eventually lead to countermeasures or even attempts to replicate Necron capabilities. The Imperium's tradition of incorporating Xenos technology into its own war machines, exemplified by the Death Watch's use of alien weapons, might be expanded to include Necron technology if enough can be learned about how it functions. The strategic implications extend to the other major factions of the galaxy as well. The Aeldari, ancient enemies of the Necrons who remember the wars of secession and the war in heaven with cultural horror, would be very interested in any intelligence about Necron awakening patterns and capabilities. If word of this incident reached the craft worlds or the forces of Comorach, it might prompt them to launch their own operations against vulnerable tomb worlds before the full awakening can occur. The Eldari have their own reasons to fear the Necrons' return, having spent millions of years benefiting from their ancient enemies' absence, and they would work to delay or prevent that return by any means necessary. The Chaos Powers, who view both the Imperium and the Necrons as potential threats to their dominion over the warp, might also take interest in this encounter. While the Necrons themselves are anathema to chaos, being soulless beings that cannot be corrupted or influenced by the warp, their awakening and the wars that will follow could create exactly the kind of suffering and despair that feeds the dark gods. Chaos forces might work to ensure that conflicts between humans and Necrons escalate, creating the psychic torment that sustains the entities of the Imperium, even as both sides believe they are fighting against Xenos or heretical threats. From a purely military perspective, this incident would become a case study in asymmetric warfare and intelligence operations. Both Imperial military academies and Necron strategic councils would study the encounter, trying to understand what lessons can be extracted from it. How should tomb world security be enhanced to prevent future infiltrations? What protocols should be developed for encountering alien warriors who have been buried in stasis? How can forces best be deployed to handle situations where traditional tactical doctrines do not apply? The answers to these questions could shape military planning for generations to come. The incident also raises philosophical questions about the nature of consciousness, identity, and the price of immortality. Both the Necron warriors and the Dreadnought pilot have achieved forms of existence that extend far beyond natural lifespans, but at tremendous cost. The Necrons lost their souls, their ability to feel and experience the full range of existence, in exchange for bodies that will not age or die. The Dreadnought pilot lost his body, his connection to the physical sensations that define biological existence, in exchange for the ability to continue fighting despite wounds that should have killed him. Are either of them truly alive in any meaningful sense? Have they both become something less than what they were, or something more? These questions have no easy answers, but they haunt both factions, raising doubts that can never be fully silenced. Conclusion. Echoes in the dark. The scenario we have explored, a sleeping Alpha Legion dreadnought discovered by awakening Necrons in the depths of a tomb world, serves as a microcosm of the larger conflicts that define the Warhammer 40,000 universe. It is a story about the collision between ages, between ancient powers awakening to find their galaxy transformed, and younger civilizations that have built empires on worlds that were once the domains of their predecessors. It is a story about the cost of survival, about warriors who have sacrificed everything human about themselves in service to causes they may no longer fully remember or understand. And it is a story about the endless nature of conflict in a galaxy where war is not an interruption of peace, but the natural state of existence. The Alpha Legion dreadnought, whether he survives his encounter with the Necrons or falls in the attempt to escape or resist, represents the Imperium's capacity for endurance in the face of impossible odds. Here is a warrior who has already given his body to the Emperor's service, who has been reduced to a brain and fragments of organs sealed in a metal sarcophagus, and who continues to fight despite suffering that would break any normal human. The very fact that he could survive being buried in a Necron tomb for potentially thousands of years speaks to the resilience that humanity has developed through 10 millennia of constant warfare against enemies both alien and heretical. The Necrons, for their part, represent something else entirely: the weight of deep time, the accumulated knowledge and power of a civilization that was already ancient, when humanity's ancestors were still learning to use fire. Their awakening is not the return of a defeated enemy, but the resumption of a campaign that was merely paused, a reminder that the galaxy's current state is temporary and that the old powers have not forgotten their claim to dominion. The discovery of the Dreadnought in their tomb is, for them, both an insult and a learning opportunity, evidence that the younger species have achieved more than expected, but nothing that ultimately challenges Necron superiority. What makes this scenario particularly fascinating is that it involves two factions that share certain philosophical similarities, despite their radically different origins. Both the Alpha Legion and the Necrons understand that victory is not always achieved through superior firepower or larger armies. Both value intelligence gathering and strategic positioning over immediate tactical gains. Both are willing to think in terms of decades, centuries, or even millennia when planning their operations. When such forces collide, the resulting confrontation becomes less about who can destroy the other more effectively and more about who can best manipulate circumstances to achieve their long-term objectives. The unanswered questions raised by this scenario are perhaps more important than any specific resolution. If the Alpha Legion did indeed place a dreadnought in a Necron tomb deliberately, what were they trying to achieve? What do they know about the Necrons that they have never shared with Imperial authorities? How many other such operations have they conducted across the galaxy, planting assets in locations that might not reveal their purpose for centuries or millennia? And if the Dreadnought's presence was accidental, the result of a failed operation or catastrophic circumstances, what does that tell us about the limitations of even the Alpha Legion's planning and capabilities? For the Necrons, the questions are equally significant. How many other infiltrations of their tomb worlds have occurred that they have not yet discovered? How much do the younger species know about Necron technology and locations? What other surprises await them as they continue their awakening and encounter a galaxy that has changed beyond recognition? And perhaps most troubling, What if some Necron tomb worlds have been compromised so thoroughly that they can no longer be trusted, their systems corrupted or manipulated by forces that the Necrons do not yet understand? These questions extend beyond the immediate participants to encompass the entire setting of Warhammer 40,000. The 41st Millennium is a time when the galaxy's old powers are stirring, when forces that have slept or hidden for millennia are returning to stake their claims. The Necrons are awakening from their great sleep. The Aeldari, both those of the craft worlds and those of the Dark City, continue their long decline while searching desperately for ways to restore their empire's lost glory. The Chaos powers, born from the suffering of the war in heaven, grow stronger with every act of violence and despair. And humanity, young and fragile and ignorant of the true scope of the threats it faces, fights desperately to survive against enemies that were ancient before Terra's sun was born. In this vast conflict, individual encounters like the one we have explored might seem insignificant. One Dreadnought, one tomb world, one small incident in a galaxy of trillions. But it is exactly such moments that can have cascading effects, that can start chains of events leading to consequences no one could have predicted. The intelligence gathered from this encounter could inform strategic decisions that affect billions of lives. The technologies studied could lead to developments that change the balance of power between factions. The individuals involved, should they survive, could carry knowledge and experiences that shape future conflicts in ways both subtle and profound. The fate of the Alpha Legion Dreadnought and the Necrons who discovered him remains uncertain, as it must in a universe where certainty is a luxury no one can afford. Perhaps the warrior managed to escape, carrying intelligence about Necron capabilities back to his Legion brethren. Perhaps he fell in a final blaze of glory, taking as many of the ancient Xenos with him as he could. Perhaps he still sits in that chamber deep in the tomb, engaging in psychological warfare with captors who believe they have him trapped, while he quietly works to turn their own systems against them. Perhaps the truth is stranger than any of these possibilities, involving plots within plots, schemes that no outside observer could hope to understand. What is certain is that the encounter between Alpha Legion and Necron, between the secrets of the 31st Millennium and the awakening powers of the 61st million year, represents something fundamental about the Warhammer 40,000 setting. That the past is never truly past, that the dead do not always remain buried, and that in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. If you have enjoyed this deep dive into the fascinating scenario of an Alpha Legion Dreadnought discovered by awakening Necrons, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps me continue to explore the darkest corners of the Warhammer 40,000 lore, uncovering the stories and scenarios that make this universe endlessly fascinating. What other impossible meetings between factions would you like to see explored? What other mysteries hidden in the galaxy's darkest corners deserve investigation? Let me know in the comments below, and remember, in the Emperor's name, let none survive.